So that brings me to sort of what's going on with Lab 6. Now I'm going to go and I will print out a bunch of copies of 1074 and 1065 of the reference manual, but it's maybe worth you looking at before you come into the lab. And it shows XXXXX here in the template, and it's trying to ask you what you think you're going to need to actually get the LCD to display in seconds. Now part of that, it's related to the prescaler, so think about that in relation to these two right here. And then the second part is just saying, okay, use the template and then change the prescaler to appropriate numbers to the counter increments every 1 millisecond. So again, you have to realize the clock and so forth. And of course, the nice thing is you can if you're doing 1 milliseconds, you can say, okay, well, if it counts to 1,000 times, how long should that be? It should be 1 second. So it's something pretty easy to correct. And it says, write code that will allow the system to work as a stopwatch, measure the amount of time between 2 presses of the push button. So you've used the joystick or whatnot, so you can use that and just try to implement a stopwatch thing that will then output the amount of time between one press and the second press. Okay, so that's all for Lab 6, and then
Alright, today we're going to be talking about the counter. So before you learn about the counter, what's the prescaler? So if you look at here, the frequency of count is equals to the frequency of a clock divided by the prescaler plus 1. And the prescaler can go from 1 to 65,500 Hz. It's a fixed value, so you can put any values between those two. So for instance, I'm using the prescaler value to be 15. Then what does it do? It will divide the frequency of your counter by 16. That means the frequency of your counter will now be 1 megahertz instead of 16 megahertz. So what does that mean? So it means counter will increment once every 1 microsecond. So how do you change that 1 microsecond into second? So we simply divide the counter by 1 million. Then the counter starts incrementing once every 1 second. So here is the code, initial code, without just plain without dividing the counter. So here you have the prescaler to be 15, and if I run this code and load it over here, you can see the counter is incrementing once every 1 microsecond. So now what we're gonna do is divide the timer count by 1 million. So we will divide it by 1 million, that is 6 zeros, and we run and load it. After you load it and you press this button, you can see that it starts incrementing once every second. So this is sort of what you are going to do for your first part. So instead of your prescaler value to be 15, you will have something like 9. So you have to change that 1 million value over there, so it will start showing every 1 second. And for part 2, you will be using the pull up down button so that you can have it as a stopwatch. So that should be it for this lab.